In the bustling halls of Lakeshore General Hospital, Dr. Naomi Carter, a brilliant and composed black physician, stands as both a healer and a leader. Her years of hard work have earned her the title of hospital director, but her journey is far from simple. On an ordinary day that feels like any other, a single encounter challenges her dignity and strength in ways she has faced too many times before. A patient gruff, skeptical, and blinded by his assumptions lashes out with hurtful words, dismissing her expertise and questioning her right to be there. But what begins as a moment of prejudice unfolds into something far more profound. 7 minutes later, a truth is revealed that leaves the patient stunned and forces him to confront the weight of his own biases. This is a story of resilience, quiet strength, and the ripple effect of change. Through small acts of grace and unexpected kindness, Dr. Naomi Carter reminds us all of the power of showing up, holding the line, and standing firm in who we are. The early morning light filtered gently through the sheer curtains in Dr. Naomi Carter's bedroom, casting faint patterns across the tidy space. The faint hum of the city beyond her window was just beginning to build, the sounds of buses rolling down the street and distant car horns blending into the background. Naomi's alarm chimed softly, a calm tone she had chosen years ago to avoid the jolt of traditional alarms. She reached over and silenced it, taking a deep breath before swinging her feet to the cool wooden floor. Her small, meticulously organized apartment reflected who she was: calm, orderly, and intentional. Shelves filled with medical books and small plants brought life to her space. On her desk sat a framed photograph of her mother, Angela Carter, who had passed away years earlier. Her mother's steady gaze often brought her a sense of quiet reassurance. Naomi's home was not extravagant, but every corner carried meaning, each piece carefully chosen, each memento telling a part of her story. Naomi stretched and moved to the kitchen to prepare her morning tea. She preferred chamomile calming, steady, just like her. As the water boiled, she ran through her day's schedule in her mind. Morning rounds, an important hospital leadership meeting, and a meeting with a new donor to discuss funding for updated medical equipment. Naomi paused for a moment as the kettle whistled, a faint smile touching her lips. From the outside, Naomi's life appeared enviable. At 41, she was the director of Lakeshore General Hospital, one of the busiest hospitals in the city. A black woman holding such a title was still, in many ways, extraordinary, a hard-fought achievement carved through relentless dedication. Yet Naomi rarely thought about it in those terms. To her, being hospital director was not about power or prestige. It was about ensuring the best care for her patients and fostering a hospital environment where staff felt valued and patients felt seen. She finished her tea and dressed in her usual uniform, a perfectly pressed white coat over navy blue blouse and slacks. Her stethoscope hung over her shoulders, a tool of her trade, but also a symbol of her life's purpose. She glanced briefly at her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her face, though calm and composed, carried the subtle marks of someone who had faced years of challenges and persevered. Her short, natural hair framed her face elegantly, her deep brown eyes sharp but kind. Naomi adjusted the hospital ID badge clipped to her coat pocket, the name Dr. Naomi Carter, hospital director, displayed prominently beneath her photo. Her phone buzzed with an early text from Janice, her assistant. Rounds start at 8. Emergency patient admitted late last night. Room 12B. You may want to check on him personally. Naomi tucked the phone away, grabbed her briefcase, and slipped on her low heels. Before heading out, she took one last look at her apartment, a quiet haven she had built for herself over the years. It was the kind of space her mother would have been proud of. Lakeshore General Hospital buzzed with its usual energy when Naomi arrived. Doctors and nurses moved with purpose through the brightly lit hallways, charts in hand, voices low but urgent. Naomi walked through the sliding glass doors and exchanged nods and small greetings with the staff she passed. Morning, Dr. Carter, a nurse called as she hurried toward the elevator. Naomi smiled warmly and nodded in response. She had worked hard to build this rapport with her staff. Naomi was the kind of leader who led by example, walking the hospital floors regularly instead of locking herself in a distant office. She wanted to be approachable, someone her team could trust. Naomi's first stop was the nurse's station on the second floor, where Janice waited with a tablet in hand. "Morning, Janice. How are we looking today?" Naomi asked as she scanned the charts Janice handed over. "Busy, as usual," Janice replied, her tone efficient but pleasant. "You'll want to see the new patient in 12B, Jack Turner, middle-aged, broken arm, and head laceration. He was brought in late last night after a fall at a construction site. He's difficult." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Difficult how?" Janice hesitated, lowering her voice. "He's questioning the staff, asking for senior doctors, implying he doesn't trust the ones who've been treating him. He refused treatment twice until a senior doctor confirmed his care plan. Some of the nurses are avoiding him." Naomi's expression didn't change, but inside, a familiar unease flickered to life. It was not uncommon for patients to express doubts about her team's expertise, especially when they were women, young doctors, or people of color. Naomi had seen it countless times throughout her career. It was subtle but insidious, a shadow that often lingered unspoken. "I'll speak to him myself," Naomi said calmly. "Thank you, Janice." Janice nodded and moved on to other tasks as Naomi made her way toward room 12B. When Naomi entered the hospital room, she found Jack Turner sitting upright in bed, his arm in a sling and a bandage across his forehead. He was an imposing man, stocky, with graying hair and a furrowed brow. His expression darkened when Naomi stepped inside. "Good morning, Mr. Turner. I'm Dr. Naomi Carter," she said in a steady, professional tone. "I'm the director of the hospital, and I'll be overseeing your care today." Jack's face twisted in visible disbelief. He looked her up and down, as if he were trying to spot something out of place. "You? You're the director?" "Yes," Naomi replied simply. She moved toward the monitor beside his bed, scanning his vitals. Jack scoffed under his breath. "Well, no offense, but I don't think I need a director. I need a real doctor, someone with experience, maybe someone—" He stopped himself mid-sentence, but the implication hung in the air, like a storm cloud. Naomi turned to face him, her expression composed but firm. "I assure you, Mr. Turner, I am a real doctor. I've been practicing medicine for over 15 years, and I lead this hospital because I care deeply about every patient who walks through these doors. Now, I understand you had concerns earlier about your treatment plan. I'd like to address them." Her voice was calm, measured, devoid of anger, but unyielding in its authority. Jack's gaze faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, mumbling something Naomi couldn't hear. "Would you like me to explain the care plan in detail?" she asked, her tone unwavering. Jack looked away, his jaw tight. "Do whatever you need to do," he muttered finally. Naomi nodded and began explaining the procedure he had undergone and the next steps for his recovery. As she spoke, her voice remained steady, and her professionalism never wavered. She focused on the work, refusing to let his words pierce her composure. But inside, Naomi felt the familiar weight of it all, the quiet assumption, the unspoken question. Does she belong here? She had faced it in medical school when professors had doubted her abilities. She had faced it as a young intern, when patients mistook her for a nurse or asked for a real doctor. And now, as a hospital director, she still faced it. The title, the years of experience, the countless lives she had saved. It never seemed to be enough for some people. After leaving Jack's room, Naomi took a moment to gather herself at the end of the hallway. She closed her eyes briefly and let out a slow breath, channeling the quiet strength her mother had taught her. "They can only make you feel small if you let them, baby," Angela used to say. Those words echoed in Naomi's mind, a steady drumbeat against the doubts that tried to creep in. "Dr. Carter?" a soft voice called. Naomi opened her eyes to find a young nurse standing nearby. Her name tag read Jasmine. "I saw how you handled Mr. Turner. I wanted to say thank you. Some of us, we notice how hard it can be. You make it easier for the rest of us to keep going." Naomi's heart softened at the quiet sincerity in the nurse's voice. She gave Jasmine a small but genuine smile. "Thank you, Jasmine. That means a lot." Jasmine nodded and hurried back to her work, leaving Naomi standing alone in the hallway. Unexpected kindness. Small moments of solidarity. They reminded Naomi why she chose this profession, why she fought so hard to create change. Her purpose was not just to heal patients, but to pave the way for others to thrive. As Naomi returned to her rounds, she felt the familiar strength settle back into her bones. Challenges would come, that much was certain, but her resolve remained unshakable. She belonged here, and no one, not even Jack Turner, could make her forget that. Naomi walked briskly through the hospital corridors, the rhythmic click of her low heels muffled by the polished floors. Her interaction with Jack Turner lingered in her mind, like an itch that wouldn't quite go away. She had handled it the way she always did, composure over confrontation, dignity over dismissal, but there was always a small, unspoken toll. It wasn't just his words, it was what they represented. The disbelief, the assumptions, the quiet demand to prove herself again. Naomi had faced these moments for so long, they had become familiar. Familiar, but never easy. She turned a corner and passed the nurse's station, where Janice was updating patient records. Janice glanced up, her brow furrowed as she caught Naomi's expression. "Everything all right?" Janice asked softly, keeping her voice low enough that others wouldn't overhear. Naomi paused, her instinct to dismiss the concern almost winning out. But Janice had worked by her side for years. Naomi knew she could trust her. "Room 12B, Naomi replied evenly, her tone betraying nothing. "He's difficult." Janice's lips pressed into a thin line of understanding. "Jack Turner. He's been difficult with everyone, but I didn't think he'd question you." Naomi's smile was faint. "Oh, Janice, people like him always question me. It's almost a rite of passage at this point." Janice sighed heavily. "You would think a broken arm would humble a man, but apparently not." Naomi chuckled softly, appreciating the levity. Janice always had a way of cutting through the tension. But even as the laughter faded, Naomi's thoughts returned to Turner's suspicious glare, the thinly veiled accusation that she was somehow unqualified. By mid-morning, Naomi was in her office, catching up on paperwork. The large window behind her desk overlooked the courtyard, where nurses took their breaks and visitors sat to catch a moment of fresh air. It was one of her favorite features of the office, offering a quiet reminder of life beyond the sterile hospital walls. Her desk was neat and functional, with a stack of patient reports on one side and her tablet on the other. At the center, a framed photograph of her mother and her younger self sat as a permanent anchor. In the photo, Naomi was only 8 years old, her mother standing tall beside her, their arms around each other, smiles wide. Her mother had been her greatest source of strength, a woman who worked 2 jobs to support Naomi's dream of becoming a doctor. Naomi still heard her voice when times were tough. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone but yourself, baby. Just keep showing up. Keep doing the work." As Naomi reached for the next report, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," she called. The door creaked open, and Jasmine, the young nurse from earlier, stepped inside, her face tense. "Dr. Carter, I think you should come," Jasmine said quietly. "It's Mr. Turner." Naomi's brow furrowed. "What happened?" "He's insisting on speaking to someone in charge," Jasmine explained. "He doesn't believe we're administering the correct treatment. He's asking for you specifically." Naomi stood, smoothing the front of her coat. "I'll handle it." As she followed Jasmine down the hallway, Naomi's mind was steady, though irritation prickled at the edge of her calm. She had already explained his treatment plan earlier, yet somehow Turner still refused to accept it. It wasn't the treatment, he doubted it was her. Room 12B was quiet when Naomi entered, though the air felt thick with tension. Jack Turner sat upright in bed, arms crossed over his chest, his expression set in a scowl. His injured arm rested stiffly in the sling, and his eyes tracked Naomi's every movement as she stepped inside. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Turner?" Naomi asked, her voice steady. "I did," Turner replied. His tone was clipped, his words carrying the weight of skepticism. "I don't think your team knows what they're doing." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Can you be more specific?" Turner gestured stiffly toward his bandaged arm. "This treatment. They said it's fine, but I don't trust it. My brother's a doctor, and he told me fractures like this need more monitoring. What if they've messed it up? I need someone who knows what they're doing." Naomi's patience, while deep, began to wear thin. "Mr. Turner, I assure you that your treatment plan is both appropriate and thorough. I reviewed your scans personally, and I trust my team completely. We have been monitoring your recovery closely." "You trust your team," Turner repeated, his voice hard with disbelief. "But why should I trust you? What makes you qualified to make that call?" Naomi's pulse quickened, but outwardly she remained composed. She held his gaze, letting the question hang for a beat longer than necessary. "Mr. Turner," she said finally, her tone calm but resolute, "I am the hospital director of Lakeshore General. I have been a practicing physician for over 15 years. I graduated with honors, completed my residency in one of the top trauma programs in the country, and I oversee every aspect of patient care in this hospital. My job, my entire purpose, is to ensure that you and every other patient receive the best care possible. I do not say that lightly, nor do I take your doubts personally." Turner's face flushed. His jaw twitched as though he wanted to respond, but he said nothing. Naomi stepped closer to his bedside, softening her tone slightly. "I understand that you're in pain and worried about your recovery. That's natural. But undermining the very people trying to help you doesn't make your situation better. My team and I are here to treat you and see you home safely. I need you to trust that we are more than capable of doing that." There was a long silence. Jack Turner's shoulders slumped slightly, though his expression remained guarded. Naomi waited, holding his gaze, letting her words sink in. Finally, Turner muttered, "Fine, I'll trust you, but only because you're here explaining it yourself." Naomi gave a small nod. "I'll take that as a start." As she turned to leave the room, Jasmine, who had been lingering quietly in the doorway, caught Naomi's eye. The younger nurse's expression was one of quiet admiration. Naomi offered her a faint smile before stepping into the hallway. The rest of the day unfolded in its usual rhythm, though the encounter with Jack Turner remained at the back of Naomi's mind. By evening, as she sat in her office tying up loose ends, Naomi reflected on the moment. There had been no outright insults, no yelling, but the doubt had been there. It always was. Naomi knew it wasn't really about her treatment plan or her qualifications. It was about Turner's assumptions, the kind of assumptions that many people carried, often unexamined, about who deserved to hold positions of authority. Naomi stared at the photograph of her mother on her desk, her mother's smile warm and familiar. "Keep showing up," she whispered to herself. There was a knock on her door, pulling her from her thoughts. Janice poked her head in. "Dr. Carter, a patient's requesting to see you again." "Who?" Naomi asked. "Jack Turner," Janice replied. "He says it's important." Naomi's brows lifted in mild surprise. "All right," she said, rising from her chair. As Naomi made her way back toward room 12B, she wondered what Turner wanted. There was something in Janice's tone, something unusual. When she entered the room, Jack was sitting upright, his expression a mix of discomfort and something else Naomi couldn't quite place. "Dr. Carter," he began, his voice quieter this time. I, uh, I wanted to say I was wrong. About earlier, Naomi tilted her head slightly. Go on. Turner shifted uncomfortably, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his blanket. I jumped to conclusions, made assumptions. And you didn't deserve that. I've been sitting here thinking about what you said, and I owe you an apology. Naomi studied him for a moment, searching for insincerity, but found none. Thank you, she said simply. I appreciate that. Turner glanced away, his face red, as if embarrassed by his own admission. Naomi offered him a small nod before leaving the room. In the hallway, she exhaled slowly. Small steps, she reminded herself. One person at a time. Sometimes, it wasn't about winning battles. It was about shifting perspectives. The evening was settling into its usual rhythm at Lakeshore General Hospital. The hallways, which buzzed with frenetic energy during the day, had quieted as patients began to rest and staff rotated shifts. Naomi stood at the window of her office, her gaze fixed on the courtyard below. The world outside looked peaceful, the last rays of sun brushing faint gold across the edges of the trees, but Naomi's thoughts swirled with the quiet weight of the day. Jack Turner's apology lingered in her mind. It had been sincere, Naomi could tell that much, and yet, something about the encounter stayed with her. Perhaps it was because Turner was just one person, in a long line of skeptics individuals who saw her first as a black woman before seeing her as a doctor or a leader. Naomi had dealt with it her entire life, and while she carried the tools to navigate it, each encounter still left an invisible mark. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. Janice entered, a tablet tucked under her arm and her expression laced with concern. Long day? She asked softly. Naomi offered a faint smile. They all are, Janice, but this one had a little extra weight. Janice nodded knowingly as she moved closer, setting the tablet on Naomi's desk. Word travels quickly here, you know. About Turner. Naomi's brow lifted slightly. Oh? He's already told a nurse that he was wrong about you, Janice explained. Apparently he's been asking questions about your background, your accomplishments. Not in the same tone as before, either. More curious. Naomi let out a quiet sigh and turned from the window, perching on the edge of her desk. Curiosity is better than contempt, I suppose. Janice tilted her head, a small, knowing smile tugging at her lips. He's coming around. Maybe today was a step forward for him. Maybe, Naomi agreed, though she knew how slow progress could be. Jack Turner's change of heart was meaningful, yes, but one man's realization would not undo the broader struggles she and others like her faced every day. Still, even small steps mattered. Naomi glanced at the clock. 6:45 p.m. Shift change would soon bring a fresh round of nurses and staff, and with that, a new energy to the building. She pushed away from her desk, grabbing her white coat from the back of her chair. Rounds? Janice asked. Always, Naomi replied. I want to check on Mr. Turner one last time before I call it a day. The hospital had taken on a quieter hum by the time Naomi reached Jack Turner's room. A new nurse, Malik, a young man with an easy smile and steady hands, was adjusting Turner's IV when Naomi stepped inside. Good evening, Mr. Turner, Naomi greeted, her tone professional, but calm. I just wanted to check on you before I head out for the night. How are you feeling? Turner glanced up, his expression softer than before. His earlier hostility had been replaced by something closer to humility. Better, he admitted, shifting slightly in the bed. Arm still aches, but I suppose that's normal. It is, Naomi confirmed. Your progress looks good, and the scans earlier today confirmed no complications. If you continue to follow the care plan, you'll be out of here soon enough. Turner hesitated, his gaze flicking toward Malik before settling back on Naomi. Doctor, he trailed off, clearing his throat uncomfortably. I wanted to say, thank you, and I mean it this time. You didn't need to give me the time of day after the way I acted earlier, but you did. You treated me like I mattered, even when I didn't show you the same respect." Naomi met his gaze steadily, her voice soft but firm. "Every patient matters, Mr. Turner. That's why I'm here. That's why my team is here." Turner looked away, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. I, I'm sorry for how I acted. I've been thinking about what you said. My wife used to tell me I could be stubborn, and I guess she was right." He paused, then added quietly, "It wasn't about you, not really, but I realize now that I made it about you anyway." Malik, who had remained silent until then, glanced at Naomi with quiet admiration. Naomi gave him a small nod, silently acknowledging the moment before returning her attention to Turner. "Awareness is the first step," she said gently. "We all carry things we don't see until someone holds up a mirror. What matters is what you choose to do with it." Turner swallowed hard, his expression unreadable. "I'll keep that in mind." Naomi nodded once more, lingering for a moment before excusing herself. Malik followed her out into the hallway, his steps matching hers as they moved toward the nurse's station. "That was impressive," Malik said quietly. Naomi glanced at him. "What was?" "The way you handled him," Malik replied. "Most people would have brushed him off or been angry, but you—" He shook his head, admiration in his voice. "You gave him grace. I think that's what changed him." Naomi's lips curved into a faint smile, though there was a hint of weariness in her expression. "Grace is hard-earned, Malik, and not everyone deserves it." He nodded thoughtfully. "But you still give it. That's what makes you different." Later that evening, as Naomi prepared to leave for the night, she passed by the nurse's break room. Laughter and light conversation filtered through the partially open door. Naomi paused for a moment, her ears picking up bits of the conversation. "Did you hear about Turner?" someone said. "He actually apologized to Dr. Carter." "About time," another voice replied. "You should have seen her earlier, calm as ever, but she didn't let him push her around. I swear, she's like a stone wall when she wants to be. And she still managed to get through to him. That's leadership right there," someone else added. Naomi stood quietly in the hallway, a small warmth spreading through her chest. She rarely heard how others talked about her behind closed doors, but moments like this reminded her of something important. Her presence mattered. Even when the work was hard, even when the world questioned her, her quiet resilience had an impact. She turned and continued toward the exit, her heels tapping softly against the tile floor. As Naomi stepped outside, the cool evening air greeted her like a balm. The city skyline was dotted with glowing windows and neon signs, each light a reminder of the lives being lived beyond the hospital walls. Naomi's car waited for her just down the street, but instead of heading straight for it, she lingered for a moment on the sidewalk. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out to find a text from her niece, Rachel, a first-year medical student. "How do you deal with people who don't take you seriously, Aunt Naomi?" "I had a rough day." Naomi's heart squeezed gently as she read the message. She thought back to Jack Turner, to his assumptions and his apology. She thought about her own years in medical school, the professors who had doubted her, and the patients who questioned her worth. And yet, here she was, a hospital director, a healer, and a leader. Her reply was simple but deliberate. "You show up, you do the work, and you let your presence remind them why you belong. Call me tonight, okay?" As Naomi tucked her phone away and headed for her car, she felt a renewed sense of purpose settle over her. The day had tested her patience, yes, but it had also affirmed something she had long believed. Change came slowly, but it came one person at a time, one interaction at a time, and sometimes even the smallest shifts could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. The sun had long disappeared by the time Naomi arrived home. Her apartment greeted her with a familiar silence, a quiet refuge from the relentless energy of the hospital. She kicked off her heels and sank into the soft cushions of her couch, exhaling deeply. The day had been long, its weight lingering on her shoulders like a heavy coat she couldn't quite shake. Her phone buzzed softly on the coffee table, breaking the stillness. It was Rachel, her niece, following up on the earlier text. Naomi smiled faintly as she answered. "Hi, sweet girl," she said warmly, leaning back into the couch. "Hi, Aunt Naomi," Rachel replied, her voice tired but determined. "Thanks for texting me earlier. I needed that." Naomi closed her eyes, picturing Rachel young, driven, a reflection of herself at that age. "Rough day?" "Yeah," Rachel admitted. "One of my clinical supervisors said I was too quiet, that I needed to be more assertive if I wanted to be taken seriously. It felt like code for something else." Naomi's chest tightened. She knew that feeling too well. The silent expectation that young black women had to prove themselves over and over again just to be seen as competent. It wasn't always blatant. Sometimes it came in the form of well-meaning advice that still carried an edge. "I remember those days," Naomi replied, her voice soft but steady. "The pressure to be something more, louder, bolder, tougher, whatever it took to fit someone else's idea of who you should be." "How did you handle it?" Rachel asked. Naomi's gaze drifted to the framed photograph of her mother on the bookshelf. "I kept showing up," she said, "not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. I knew what I was capable of, and I refused to let anyone tell me otherwise. Eventually, my work spoke louder than their doubts." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "It's just exhausting sometimes," Rachel admitted. "I know," Naomi said softly. "But every time you show up, you're paving the way for someone else to follow. Remember that." "Thanks, Aunt Naomi," Rachel replied, her voice brighter. "That helps a lot." "Call me any time," Naomi said with a small smile. "And remember, you belong in those rooms, no matter what anyone else thinks." After hanging up, Naomi sat quietly for a long moment, the conversation stirring memories she hadn't revisited in years. She thought back to her own days in medical school, the long nights spent studying in dimly lit libraries, the professors whose expectations were measured unfairly, and the quiet determination that had carried her through it all. The next morning, Naomi was back at Lakeshore General before the sun had fully risen, her white coat crisp and her focus sharp. The hospital stirred to life around her, the smell of antiseptic mixing with the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee as staff clocked in for their shifts. Naomi moved through the hallways with practiced purpose, greeting nurses, doctors, and custodians alike with a warm nod or a quiet smile. Though she was the director, Naomi believed that leadership was best shown through connection, through recognizing every individual who played a part in keeping the hospital running. At the nurses' station, Janice was already reviewing the day's schedule. She looked up as Naomi approached, a teasing smile on her lips. "Back at it early, I see," Janice said. "Early bird gets the chaos," Naomi replied, earning a small laugh. Janice handed her a file. "There's something you should know. Jack Turner has been asking questions again." Naomi's brow furrowed slightly. "What kind of questions?" "About you," Janice said, lowering her voice. "Not in a bad way this time. He's been asking the nurses about your career, how long you've been here, how you became director. He even asked Malik what medical school you went to." Naomi tilted her head, processing the information. It was an unexpected shift. Turner had gone from outright skepticism to curiosity, a change that, while subtle, was not lost on her. "Interesting," she said finally. Janice shrugged. "Maybe he's coming to terms with the fact that his assumptions were wrong. It happens, you know, once in a blue moon." Naomi allowed herself a faint smile. "I'll take progress wherever I can get it." Naomi's next stop was the administrative wing for a hospital leadership meeting. These weekly gatherings brought together department heads to discuss hospital operations, challenges, and future initiatives. Naomi always ran the meetings with calm efficiency, encouraging open dialogue while keeping discussions focused. Today's agenda centered on a major point: implementing diversity and sensitivity training for hospital staff. Naomi had been pushing for it for months, and the recent incident with Turner had only solidified her resolve. As the meeting began, Naomi addressed the room with her usual measured confidence. As many of you know, we've been working to improve not just the quality of care we provide, but the environment in which we provide it. Patients come to us vulnerable, trusting that we'll treat them with respect and dignity no matter who they are. And that responsibility starts with us. A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Dr. Lawson, the head of emergency medicine, nodded thoughtfully. "I think we all agree with the intent here, Dr. Carter, but what exactly are you proposing?" Naomi tapped the tablet in front of her, pulling up a slide that displayed the outline of a new training initiative. Comprehensive diversity and sensitivity training for all hospital staff, from the front desk to the operating room. It's not about blame. It's about awareness. We all carry unconscious biases, and the first step to addressing them is recognizing they exist. Some heads nodded. Others looked skeptical. Naomi expected this. Change, even positive change, was never embraced overnight. Dr. Chen, the chief of surgery, leaned forward. "You're right, Dr. Carter. Bias can affect the way we treat both patients and colleagues, and sometimes we don't even see it happening. This could be an opportunity for growth." Naomi felt a flicker of relief. She had allies in the room, and their support mattered. "Let's be clear," Naomi continued, her tone steady. "This isn't a box to check off. It's about creating a hospital culture where respect and inclusion aren't just ideals, but daily practices. That benefits our staff and, more importantly, our patients." The meeting ended with tentative approval to move forward with the initiative. Naomi knew it would take time to implement, months, maybe longer, but it was a step in the right direction. As the room emptied, Dr. Chen lingered for a moment. "You know, Dr. Carter," he said quietly, "when you first proposed this, I wasn't sure how necessary it was. But I've been thinking a lot about what you said. And you're right, awareness is everything." Naomi nodded, appreciating his honesty. "It's a journey for all of us, Dr. Chen. I'm glad you're on board." By mid-afternoon, Naomi was back on the hospital floor, checking in with staff and patients. When she stopped by Jack Turner's room, she found him sitting up in bed, his expression less guarded than the day before. "Dr. Carter," Turner said, his voice gruff but softer, "I've been reading up on you. Turns out you're quite the accomplished doctor." Naomi raised an eyebrow, though her tone remained light. "You sound surprised, Mr. Turner." He looked away, shame flickering across his face. "I guess I am. Not because of you, just because of me. I made assumptions I shouldn't have." Naomi let the silence settle before responding. "It's never too late to see things differently, Mr. Turner." He nodded slowly. "I appreciate you saying that, and for not giving up on me even when I didn't deserve it." Naomi offered him a small, genuine smile. "Take care of that arm, and next time, remember to trust the people trying to help you." Turner chuckled faintly, though his eyes held a trace of gratitude. "I'll remember." As Naomi stepped out of the room, she felt the familiar heaviness of these encounters begin to lift. Turner's shift was small, but it mattered. Sometimes, the most profound changes started with something as simple as an apology and the grace to accept it. In the hallway, Malik approached with a grin. "You've got a new fan, Dr. Carter," he teased. Naomi smiled. "One person at a time, Malik." "One person at a time," he echoed. And as Naomi moved on to her next task, she carried with her a quiet hope that small moments, when strung together, could ripple outward and create something better. The hum of the hospital softened as the afternoon melted into evening. The bustling corridors seemed quieter, the fluorescent lights above casting a warm glow over the otherwise sterile space. Naomi's steps were purposeful but measured as she walked toward her office, The interaction with Jack Turner, earlier that afternoon, had left her pensive. His words, clumsy, guilt-ridden as they were, had surprised her. Turner had acknowledged his prejudice, albeit imperfectly, and that wasn't something Naomi encountered often. Apologies were rare in these situations. Too often people dug their heels in, hiding behind pride or ignorance, leaving Naomi to carry the weight of the encounter alone. But Jack had chosen differently. A small step, yes, but small steps mattered. Naomi stepped into her office and closed the door softly behind her. The room felt like a retreat, a small oasis amid the ever-churning tide of hospital life. She hung her white coat on the hook by the door and sank into her chair. Outside the window, the sky was turning to shades of deep purple, the first stars emerging like pinpricks of light against the fading day. For a moment, Naomi allowed herself to pause, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of the framed photograph of her mother on the desk. The weight of the day pressed down on her shoulders, a weight she'd grown used to, but never stopped feeling. A sharp knock broke her quiet moment. "Come in," Naomi called, straightening in her chair. The door opened to reveal Malik, the young nurse she had spoken to earlier, holding a small cardboard box. His face carried a faint look of mischief, like a child hiding a secret. "Good evening, Dr. Carter," he said, stepping inside. "Evening, Malik," Naomi replied, tilting her head with curiosity. "What can I do for you?" He set the box carefully on her desk, as though presenting a delicate artifact. "This is for you," he said, unable to hide his grin. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "From whom?" "From the staff," Malik said simply, taking a step back. "A little something to say, thank you." Naomi blinked, caught off guard. "Thank you? For what?" Malik smiled softly. "For everything, Dr. Carter. For the way you lead this place. For how you handled Mr. Turner today. We all saw it, and we see you every day, how much you do for us. So, this is just a small gesture." Naomi felt a flicker of something unexpected in her chest, a warmth that pushed against the guarded calm she wore like armor. She glanced down at the box and carefully lifted the lid. Inside, resting neatly on tissue paper, was a mug, a deep blue ceramic piece with elegant white lettering that read, "Leaders like you change the world." Tucked beside the mug was a handwritten note signed by over a dozen staff members, nurses, doctors, custodians, administrative assistants. "Dr. Carter, thank you for always leading with grace, strength, and heart. You inspire us to be better every day." Naomi's throat tightened as she traced the words on the note with her finger. It wasn't an extravagant gift, but its simplicity made it all the more meaningful. It was a reminder that her work mattered, that her presence made a difference. She looked up to find Malik watching her carefully, his smile softer now. "It was Jasmine's idea," he said, "but everyone wanted to contribute." Naomi swallowed, willing her voice to remain steady. This means a lot. Please thank everyone for me." Malik nodded. "You can thank them yourself tomorrow, but we just wanted to make sure you knew you're appreciated." As he left the office, Naomi sat quietly for a long moment, the mug and note still in her hands. She wasn't someone who craved recognition. She didn't need praise to validate her work. But in a job where challenges often outnumbered victories, this unexpected kindness felt like a balm. It wasn't the gift itself. It was the thought behind it. It was knowing that others saw her efforts, her struggles, and her quiet persistence. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "You keep showing up, baby. People will see you, whether they say it or not." Naomi smiled faintly, her eyes stinging as she carefully set the mug on her desk. The next morning, Naomi arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. She stopped by the break room first, where the nursing staff gathered for coffee and handovers. As she entered, the quiet chatter paused momentarily, and a few heads turned toward her. "Good morning," Naomi said, her voice carrying warmth as she held up the mug Malik had delivered. "I just wanted to say thank you to all of you. I'm not usually one for speeches, but this meant more to me than I can say. Leading this hospital is a privilege, but working alongside all of you is the real honor." The room erupted into small smiles and murmurs of appreciation. Jasmine, the young nurse who had suggested the gift, beamed with pride from where she stood by the coffee machine. Malik offered a quiet nod from the corner, his expression content. "Thank you, Dr. Carter," someone called, a sentiment echoed by others. Naomi felt a rare lightness as she left the room. The challenges she faced hadn't disappeared overnight, but this moment of connection had given her something precious, a renewed sense of purpose. Later that day, Naomi found herself back in Jack Turner's room. His demeanor had continued to soften since their last conversation, though his gruffness hadn't entirely disappeared. "Dr. Carter," he greeted as she stepped inside. "Back again?" "I like to make sure my patients are on track," Naomi replied, offering a small smile as she scanned his chart. "How's the arm feeling today?" "Less painful," Turner admitted. He shifted slightly, then hesitated before speaking again. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about awareness." Naomi looked up from the chart, her gaze steady. "Go on?" Turner cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "I've spent my life around people like me, construction workers, contractors, guys who don't always see the world beyond what's right in front of them. And maybe that's the problem. I didn't know better. But I see it now. You didn't owe me anything, but you treated me with respect. That says something about you." Naomi studied him for a moment before responding. "Sometimes, Mr. Turner, people carry things they don't realize, biases, assumptions. What matters is whether they're willing to face them and grow." Turner's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I'll try to remember that." "Good," Naomi replied softly. "It's never too late to start." As she left the room, she passed Jasmine in the hallway. The young nurse smiled as she handed Naomi a tablet. "You're making a habit of changing minds, Dr. Carter," Jasmine teased. Naomi gave a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "One at a time, Jasmine, one at a time." That evening, as Naomi sat at her desk, she glanced at the blue mug perched neatly beside her computer. Its message, "Leaders like you change the world," felt both humbling and empowering. She didn't believe in changing the world through grand gestures. Change, she knew, happened in small moments. It happened in patience, in grace, and in the unexpected kindnesses that rippled outward. Naomi reached for her phone and typed a quick message to Rachel. "Some days are harder than others, but kindness always wins. Never forget that." As the message sent, Naomi looked out the window into the evening sky, where the stars had begun to appear once more. The work wasn't finished. It never would be, but today had reminded her of something important. Change didn't always come in loud, sweeping waves. Sometimes it came softly, one heart, one mind at a time, and for Naomi, that was enough. Naomi arrived at the hospital just as the early morning light began to cast its golden glow over the city. The parking lot was still quiet, with only a few cars dotting the rows of spaces. As she stepped out of her car and glanced up at the sprawling facade of Lakeshore General, a familiar feeling settled over her, a mix of pride, responsibility, and the quiet knowledge that her work here mattered. Carrying her bag and her now favorite blue mug, Naomi made her way through the automatic glass doors into the main lobby. The hospital was coming to life. The faint hum of conversations, the shuffle of feet across the polished floors, and the muted beeping of distant machines all blended into the familiar morning symphony. "Good morning, Dr. Carter," a cheerful voice called. Naomi turned to see Jasmine hurrying toward her, her clipboard tucked close to her chest. "Good morning, Jasmine," Naomi replied warmly. "How's the floor looking today?" "Busy," Jasmine said, though her tone carried its usual brightness. "But nothing you can't handle." Naomi smiled at that. Let's hope you're right. The two walked together toward the nurses' station, where Janice was already coordinating shift changes. The crisp efficiency of the staff always impressed Naomi. Every person, from the nurses to the custodians, played an essential role. It was her job to make sure they felt seen, respected, and valued. As Naomi reached for the patient reports waiting on the desk, Janice handed her a tablet. "There's something you should know before you start your rounds," she said in a quieter tone. Naomi glanced up. "What is it?" "Mr. Turner," Janice replied. "He's been talking to some of the other patients and staff this morning, sharing what happened between the two of you. I guess his apology really stuck." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "What exactly is he sharing?" "That he was wrong about you," Janice said with a small smile. "Apparently he's been telling people how you handled him with grace and dignity, and how it made him rethink his assumptions. He even told Malik that he wishes he'd had a doctor like you years ago." Naomi paused, letting the words settle. Jack Turner's quiet shift was spreading in unexpected ways, like ripples across still water. She couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, not because Turner had changed his mind, but because he was now sharing his experience with others. Maybe, just maybe, those ripples would keep expanding. Naomi's rounds that morning took her through several wings of the hospital, from post-op recovery to the pediatric unit. She moved from room to room with her usual calm focus, speaking with patients, listening to concerns, and checking on treatment plans. In one room, she found an elderly woman named Mrs. Robbins sitting by the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she gazed outside. "Good morning, Mrs. Robbins," Naomi said softly, pulling up a chair beside her. "How are you feeling today?" Mrs. Robbins turned, her wrinkled face breaking into a faint smile. "Better, thanks to you and your team, Doctor. I'm hoping to get home soon." Naomi nodded, scanning her chart. "Your progress is looking good. If things continue to improve, we can talk about discharging you in the next couple of days." Mrs. Robbins's smile grew, but then her expression shifted, her eyes narrowing slightly as though studying Naomi. "You know, I overheard some nurses talking about you yesterday," she said. Naomi tilted her head curiously. "Oh? They were saying how you handled that man. What was his name?" "Turner?" Mrs. Robbins's gaze softened. "I heard he gave you a hard time." Naomi offered a small smile, choosing her words carefully. "We had a misunderstanding, but I think we've come to a better place now." Mrs. Robbins nodded thoughtfully. "I just wanted to say, I admire you, Doctor. I've seen people like him before. I know what that kind of doubt looks like. But you carry yourself differently. My late husband always used to say, dignity isn't just what you have, it's how you give it to others. That's what I see in you." Naomi felt a warmth spread through her chest at the older woman's words. "Thank you, Mrs. Robbins. That means more than you know." The two sat quietly for a moment, the sun spilling golden light across the room. As Naomi rose to leave, Mrs. Robbins added, "You keep doing what you're doing, Doctor. People like you change the world, even if they don't always realize it right away." Naomi's next stop was the surgical wing, where she ran into Malik outside a patient room. He was checking an IV line and updating a chart on his tablet, his expression focused. "How's it going, Malik?" Naomi asked, pausing beside him. "Good, Dr. Carter," he replied, his easy smile returning as he looked up. "You know, I've been thinking about Mr. Turner." "What about him?" Naomi asked. Malik hesitated for a moment before speaking. "It's not just what he said to you that stood out, it's how you responded. You didn't meet his hostility with anger. You stayed calm and professional, and somehow, you got through to him." Naomi regarded Malik thoughtfully. "Sometimes the best response to ignorance is composure," she said softly. "It doesn't always change someone's mind, but it leaves them with nothing to justify their assumptions." Malik nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "I guess I never thought about it that way. It's easy to get angry in moments like that." "It is, Naomi agreed. But anger only takes us so far. Grace, though that can open doors. Malik looked at her with quiet admiration. You make it look easy. Naomi smiled faintly. It's not, but it's worth it. Later that afternoon, Naomi was reviewing patient reports in her office when her phone buzzed with an unexpected message. Dr. Carter, this is Jack Turner. I'm being discharged today, and I wanted to say thank you again. You reminded me of something important, and I'll carry that with me. Naomi stared at the screen for a moment, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Gratitude, relief, and something else, hope. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she set her phone down and leaned back in her chair, letting the quiet of her office settle around her. Jack Turner's journey wasn't just about him. It was about the ripple effect of change, the way one moment of reflection, one instance of grace could stretch outward and touch the lives of others. People like Malik, like Jasmine, like Mrs. Robbins, all of them had witnessed the encounter, and all of them had taken something from it. Naomi thought of her mother's words again. You keep showing up, baby. That was what mattered most, showing up, day after day, and choosing to respond to the world not with anger or bitterness, but with dignity and strength. Naomi knew she couldn't change every mind, but that wasn't the point. Change didn't happen all at once. It happened quietly, steadily, one story at a time. She picked up her phone and typed a response to Turner. Thank you, Mr. Turner. I wish you a smooth recovery. Take care of yourself. As she hit send, Naomi glanced out the window. The sun was beginning its slow descent, streaking the sky with shades of pink and orange. Another day at Lakeshore General was ending, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for now, Naomi allowed herself to feel a sense of peace. Small steps mattered. Small victories counted. And sometimes, it was the quiet moments of connection that carried the greatest weight of all. The following morning, the hospital buzzed with a fresh wave of energy. Patients and families moved through the lobby in a steady stream, some clutching paperwork, others trailing IV poles, or sitting quietly in the waiting area. Naomi stood near the nurse's station, her white coat pristine, the familiar weight of her stethoscope resting comfortably on her shoulders. The day had started with a sense of quiet normalcy, chart reviews, a quick meeting with Janice, and early rounds. Yet something felt different in the air, a subtle shift Naomi couldn't quite name. As she flipped through a patient file, Jasmine approached with an eager expression. Dr. Carter, she said, holding out a neatly folded note. This came for you, from Mr. Turner. He asked one of the discharge nurses to deliver it before he left yesterday. Naomi blinked in mild surprise. A note? Yes, Jasmine said, clearly intrigued. I didn't read it, of course, but he seemed sincere, thoughtful, even. Naomi accepted the note, setting it gently on the counter. Thank you, Jasmine. The young nurse smiled and hurried off to her next task, leaving Naomi standing alone by the station. She glanced at the note for a moment, its plain envelope simple, but weighted with meaning. Carefully, she unfolded it and began to read. Dr. Carter, I've thought a lot about the way I treated you, about the way I looked at you when you first walked into my room. I wish I could take back my words, but I know I can't. What I can do is tell you this: I was wrong. Not just about you, but about a lot of things. You said something that stuck with me. Awareness is the first step. I realized that for most of my life, I haven't been aware, not really. I judged people without knowing their stories. I carried assumptions that I never bothered to question. I see that now. You didn't have to treat me with kindness after the way I acted, but you did. You didn't have to show me respect, but you did. And that made me ask myself a question I've been avoiding. What kind of person do I want to be? I don't know if you'll ever think of me again, but I'll remember you. You opened my eyes, Dr. Carter. That's no small thing. Thank you, Jack Turner. Naomi folded the note slowly, her fingers brushing over its edges. A quiet ache settled in her chest, not of pain, but of something deeper. She was used to fighting battles like this, used to the doubts and the looks, the subtle ways people questioned her presence in spaces where she'd worked so hard to belong. But Jack Turner's letter reminded her of something she sometimes forgot. Change was possible. Even the most stubborn minds could shift when met with dignity and truth. The sound of footsteps pulled Naomi from her thoughts. Janice appeared, tablet in hand, with her usual brisk efficiency. "We've got a full afternoon, Dr. Carter. You're needed in the conference room in 15 minutes for the sensitivity training presentation." Naomi smiled faintly. "Right on time, as always." Janice returned the smile before glancing at the note in Naomi's hand. "Something important?" Naomi hesitated, then tucked the note into her coat pocket. "Just a reminder of why we do this work." The sensitivity training Naomi had proposed weeks earlier was finally beginning. She had worked tirelessly to implement the program, knowing that meaningful change in a workplace, especially one as diverse and demanding as a hospital, required more than just policies. It required awareness, compassion, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The conference room was already filling with staff when Naomi arrived. Nurses, doctors, administrators, and support staff sat in quiet clusters, some chatting, others sipping coffee. A large screen at the front displayed the words "Diversity and Sensitivity in Healthcare, Building a Culture of Respect." As Naomi walked to the podium, the room fell into a respectful hush. She set her notes down, adjusted her glasses, and surveyed the room. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Thank you for taking the time to be here today. I know this training is new for many of us, and for some, it may feel uncomfortable. But I want to start with this. Discomfort is not the enemy. It's often where growth begins." Her words hung in the air for a moment before she continued. "We work in an environment where people come to us at their most vulnerable, patients who are scared, families who are grieving, colleagues who are under pressure. In those moments, every action we take matters. Every word we say matters. And the assumptions we carry can shape how we treat one another, whether we realize it or not." Around the room, heads nodded slowly, expressions shifting from curiosity to quiet reflection. Naomi could see Jasmine and Malik near the back, their faces attentive and supportive. Dr. Chen sat near the front, his arms crossed thoughtfully, while Janice stood off to the side, taking in every word. Naomi continued, sharing examples from her own career, not just as a leader, but as a woman who had spent years navigating the unspoken biases that shadowed her path. She spoke of moments of doubt, of quiet victories, and of the importance of seeing people as they truly were, not as we expected them to be. "Healthcare is not just about treating illness," she said. "It's about treating people with respect, with empathy, and with the recognition that every person, no matter who they are, deserves dignity. That includes our patients, and it includes each other." As Naomi finished, the room was silent for a long beat. Then, one by one, people began to clap softly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Naomi offered a humble smile and stepped back from the podium, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. Later that evening, as Naomi walked through the hospital, she noticed small changes already taking root. Malik was speaking gently with a new intern, guiding her through a patient's care plan with patience and care. Jasmine was laughing softly with an elderly patient in the recovery ward, taking the time to make him feel seen and heard. Even Dr. Chen, usually so reserved, was speaking warmly with a nurse who looked both surprised and pleased by his attentiveness. The changes were small, but Naomi knew they mattered. Every act of kindness, every moment of awareness was another ripple in the pond, a ripple that could stretch farther than anyone realized. As she passed through the main lobby, Naomi spotted a familiar face sitting on one of the benches. It was Jack Turner, his arms still in a sling, but his posture relaxed. He was waiting for his ride home, staring quietly at the bustling hospital around him. Naomi approached with a soft smile. "Mr. Turner," she said. Turner looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to gratitude. "Dr. Carter," he replied, standing slowly. "I didn't expect to see you again." "I just wanted to say goodbye," Naomi said, "and to wish you a smooth recovery." Turner nodded, his gaze sincere. "Thank you, doctor, for everything." He paused, as though searching for the right words. "You know, I don't think I'll ever forget what you said to me, that awareness is the first step. I've got a lot to think about, but I'll start there." Naomi extended her hand, and Turner shook it firmly. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Turner." "You too, Dr. Carter," he said. "You're one hell of a doctor, and a better person than I deserved." As Naomi watched him walk toward the exit, she felt a quiet sense of peace. People could change. It wasn't always easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but it was possible. She turned back toward the heart of the hospital, where her work awaited her. The day was far from over, but she carried with her a renewed sense of purpose. Some battles were fought in courtrooms or boardrooms. Others were fought in quiet moments, moments where grace and dignity held far more power than anger ever could. Naomi knew the road ahead was long, but she was ready. One person at a time. One ripple at a time. The day had quieted into its late afternoon rhythm at Lakeshore General Hospital. The frenzied pace of the morning had slowed, and a gentle stillness had settled over the wards. Naomi walked through the hallway of the surgical wing, clipboard in hand, her mind drifting to moments earlier, Jack Turner's farewell and the growing impact of the sensitivity training she had introduced. It was subtle, but Naomi had begun to notice a shift among the staff. Conversations seemed more open, more thoughtful. Nurses lingered an extra minute with anxious patients, doctors checked in with team members more deliberately, and interns approached tasks with a clearer sense of teamwork. Change didn't happen in loud, sweeping gestures, she reminded herself. It happened quietly, through small, deliberate actions. Naomi turned a corner and found herself outside the pediatric ward. The walls were adorned with bright murals of cartoon animals and rainbows, the cheerful colors and intentional contrast to the worries that often lived inside the rooms. Laughter bubbled faintly from a group of children sitting in a play area. She was about to move on when she noticed a young resident standing hesitantly near one of the rooms, his hands fidgeting nervously. Naomi recognized him immediately. Dr. Evan Wells, fresh out of residency and eager to prove himself, though often uncertain. He wore his white coat stiffly, as though afraid it didn't quite fit him yet. "Dr. Wells," Naomi called softly, approaching him. Evan turned sharply, his expression one of mild relief mixed with embarrassment. "Oh, Dr. Carter, I didn't see you there." "Everything all right?" Naomi asked, stopping beside him. She glanced at the door to the room he had been hovering near. Through the small window, she could see a young boy sitting on the bed, staring quietly at his hands. Evan sighed. "It's Joey Walters. He's 6 years old, in recovery after surgery on his leg. His parents aren't here yet. They're on their way from out of town. He's anxious, but I'm not sure I'm the right person to comfort him." Naomi tilted her head, studying Evan carefully. "Why do you think that?" Evan's shoulders slumped slightly. "I don't know. I'm just not great with kids. They can tell I'm nervous, and then they get nervous too. I don't want to make things worse." Naomi offered a small smile, her voice calm and steady. "Let me tell you something, Dr. Wells. When I was an intern, I felt the same way. I worried I would say the wrong thing, or not know how to connect with patients, especially children. But the truth is, it's not about having the perfect words. It's about being present, showing them you care." Evan looked at her, his expression uncertain but hopeful. "But what if I don't know what to say?" "Then don't say much," Naomi replied gently. "Listen, let them know they're not alone. Sometimes that's all someone needs." Evan nodded, exhaling slowly. I'll try. Good, Naomi said, offering an encouraging smile. And I'll be right here if you need me. Evan squared his shoulders and stepped into the room, his movements tentative at first. Naomi lingered just outside, watching as he approached the young boy's bed. Hi, Joey, Evan said softly, his voice low but kind. How's your leg feeling? The boy looked up, his eyes wide and uncertain. It hurts a little, he mumbled. I know, Evan replied. But you're really brave. I couldn't do what you're doing. Joey blinked, his expression shifting slightly. Really? Really, Evan said with a small smile. When I was your age, I was scared of doctors and hospitals. But you're already doing better than I ever did. Joey's lips twitched into a faint smile of his own, the tension in his shoulders softening. Evan pulled a small chair up to the side of the bed and sat down, his posture more relaxed now. I bet you're good at something, though, Evan continued. What's your favorite thing to do? The boy's face brightened slightly. I like to draw, animals and stuff. I have a sketchbook at home. That's cool, Evan said. Maybe you can show me your drawings next time. I'd like that. As the conversation continued, Naomi smiled softly from the hallway. Evan's nervousness had given way to a genuine connection, his quiet presence helping the boy feel seen and comforted. It was a small moment, but to Joey, Naomi knew it would matter. Naomi spent the rest of the afternoon moving between meetings, checking on patients, and reviewing departmental updates. By the time evening arrived, she found herself back in her office, the setting sun casting long shadows across her desk. Her phone buzzed with a text from her niece Rachel. Aunt Naomi, I talked to my supervisor today. I stood my ground and told him I was here to learn and contribute, just like everyone else. He actually listened. You were right, showing up matters. Naomi's lips curved into a proud smile as she typed a reply. I'm proud of you, Rachel. Never forget that you belong exactly where you are. She set her phone aside and let out a slow breath, the day's events settling in her mind. Jack Turner's note. Evan's breakthrough with Joey. Rachel's quiet victory. Naomi often thought of her mother during moments like this, her gentle strength, her unshakable belief in Naomi's potential. She imagined how proud her mother would be now, seeing the ripples of her influence stretching across generations and spaces where Naomi had once been doubted. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, clear and steady. The work you do matters, baby. Even when it feels small, even when no one says thank you, every step forward makes a difference. Naomi reached for her blue mug, the one the staff had gifted her days earlier. Its inscription, "Leaders like you change the world," felt truer now than ever. Change didn't happen in dramatic gestures or sweeping victories. It happened in the quiet, persistent work of showing up day after day and refusing to let the world's doubts shape who you were. She took a slow sip of her tea, staring out the window as the city lights blinked to life beyond the glass. Somewhere out there, Jack Turner was telling his story to someone else. Somewhere in the hospital, Evan Wells was learning to trust himself as a doctor. Somewhere, her niece Rachel was carving her own path, emboldened by lessons Naomi had once learned the hard way. And somewhere, Naomi knew, there were others like her, women and men who faced assumptions, who carried the weight of prejudice and bias but chose to keep showing up. They were part of something larger, a collective effort to build a world where dignity and respect weren't conditional, but given freely to all. Naomi straightened in her chair, a renewed sense of purpose settling in her chest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as it always did. There would be more battles to fight, more stories to hear, and more minds to shift. But for now, she allowed herself to rest, the quiet strength within her growing stronger with every passing day. Keep showing up, she whispered to herself, the words a promise both to her mother's memory and to herself, because she knew that every small act, every ripple of change, would lead to something greater in the end. Morning sunlight poured through the hospital's glass entrance as Naomi strode through the lobby, her shoes tapping a measured rhythm against the polished floors. The previous day lingered fresh in her mind, the note from Jack Turner, the small victories among her staff, and Rachel's quiet confidence blooming miles away. Each of those moments reminded her why she kept showing up. Today would be no different. Naomi paused briefly at the main reception desk, exchanging smiles with a receptionist named Lillian, who always greeted patients and staff with unshakable warmth. "Busy day ahead?" Naomi asked casually. "Always," Lillian replied with a grin. "But it's easier knowing you're steering the ship, Dr. Carter." Naomi chuckled softly at the compliment. "Thank you, Lillian. Let's make it a good one." With that, Naomi made her way to the surgical wing for her morning rounds. As she turned a corner, she spotted Dr. Evan Wells walking briskly toward her, his expression unusually tense. He had shed much of his nervous energy in recent weeks, and Naomi's encouragement had helped him find his footing. But today, something was clearly wrong. "Dr. Wells?" Naomi called, stopping in her tracks. Evan slowed to a halt, visibly hesitant. "Dr. Carter, I need to talk to you," he said, glancing down the hallway as if someone might overhear. Naomi motioned for him to follow her into an empty consultation room. The door clicked shut behind them, the faint hum of the hospital muffled outside. "What happened?" Naomi asked, her voice calm but firm. Evan ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "There was an incident. A patient's father, Mr. Reed, said something to Jasmine this morning. Something inappropriate." Naomi's brow furrowed. "What did he say?" Evan shifted uncomfortably. He implied she wasn't capable of handling his son's care. He asked if there wasn't someone more qualified who could help someone more experienced. Naomi exhaled slowly, the weight of the words settling over her like a familiar burden. She didn't need Evan to spell out the subtext. It was the same tone she had encountered time and time again, thinly veiled doubt, always aimed at those who didn't fit someone else's idea of who belonged. "Where is Jasmine now?" Naomi asked softly. "She's in the break room," Evan replied. "She didn't say much afterward, but I could tell it rattled her. She didn't deserve that." "No, she didn't," Naomi said firmly. "Thank you for bringing this to me, Evan. I'll handle it." Evan looked relieved, but still unsettled. "Dr. Carter, how do you keep doing it? Facing people like that and staying so composed?" Naomi met his gaze steadily. "Because I know who I am, Dr. Wells, and I refuse to let anyone else define me." Evan nodded, visibly absorbing her words. "Jasmine's lucky to have someone like you in her corner. We all are." Naomi gave him a small nod before stepping back into the hallway. Naomi found Jasmine sitting alone in the break room, staring at her hands. Her normally bright and enthusiastic demeanor seemed dimmed, her shoulders slightly hunched. The quiet hum of a vending machine filled the otherwise silent room. "Jasmine," Naomi said softly, closing the door behind her. The young nurse looked up quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Dr. Carter, I'm fine, really. You don't have to worry." Naomi pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, her voice gentle but insistent. "You don't have to pretend with me, Jasmine. I heard what happened." Jasmine's face fell, her smile disappearing. "It's nothing I haven't heard before," she admitted quietly. "I know I'm good at my job, but sometimes it feels like no matter how hard I work, someone will always look at me and see inexperienced or not enough." Naomi studied her carefully, remembering a younger version of herself sitting in the same position, questioning, exhausted, and unsure of how to keep holding the line. "Jasmine," she said softly, "I know exactly how that feels." Jasmine looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "I've been questioned, dismissed, and overlooked more times than I care to count," Naomi continued. "But do you know what I learned? It's not about them. It's about you, about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone take that from you. Jasmine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as Naomi's words settled over her. But how do you keep going? How do you not get angry? Naomi smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried years of experience. Oh, I've been angry, Jasmine. I've been tired too. But every time I face someone's doubt, I remind myself of two things. First, I didn't get here by accident. I worked for this, and I earned my place. And second, every time I show up and prove them wrong, I'm making it just a little easier for the next person who looks like me or like you. Jasmine let out a shaky breath, her shoulders straightening ever so slightly. It feels so unfair sometimes. It is, Naomi replied honestly. But the world doesn't change unless we keep showing up. You're doing the work, Jasmine, and your work speaks for itself. Jasmine wiped at her eyes, a small, grateful smile tugging at her lips. Thank you, Dr. Carter. I needed that. Naomi rose to her feet, resting a hand briefly on Jasmine's shoulder. You're going to be just fine, and if you ever need someone in your corner, you know where to find me. As Naomi left the break room, she felt a flicker of pride. Jasmine was young, but she was strong. And sometimes all someone needed was to see a path forward, a reminder that they weren't alone. The encounter stayed with Naomi throughout the rest of the day, a quiet ache lingering in her chest. After years of facing the same battles, she had learned to endure them. But watching others, especially those just starting their careers, face the same struggles weighed on her. Late that afternoon, Naomi found herself sitting in her office, her gaze drifting to the framed photo of her mother. Her mother's words echoed softly in her mind. You're not just fighting for yourself, baby. You're clearing the path for those who come after you. She reached for the blue mug on her desk, its inscription, Leaders like you change the world, catching the fading light from the window. She thought about Jasmine, about Evan, about all the people who looked to her for guidance, whether they realized it or not. Leading wasn't always about making big decisions or solving every problem. Sometimes it was about standing firm in the face of doubt and showing others how to do the same. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, Naomi picked up her phone and sent a quick message to Rachel. You're going to face people who question you. Let them, then show them why they're wrong. A reply came almost instantly. You always know what to say. Love you, Aunt Naomi. Naomi smiled softly as she set the phone down, her heart full. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more doubts to confront, more people to inspire, but she would be ready. Because every time she showed up, every time she held the line, she made the path a little clearer for those who came next. And that, Naomi knew, was how change truly happened. The following morning brought a steady drizzle, misting the glass panes of Lakeshore General Hospital. Naomi stood near the lobby windows, watching droplets race each other to the bottom. It was a quiet, reflective moment, the kind she didn't often allow herself in the busyness of her days. Today felt heavier, not in a burdensome way, but as if something meaningful was settling into place. A soft knock at the door to her office broke her reverie. Janice peeked in, her usual clipboard tucked under her arm. Dr. Carter, Janice said with a rare smile that carried something deeper than her usual efficiency. You have a visitor in the conference room. He says you'll know who he is. Naomi's brow furrowed with curiosity. A visitor? Janice simply nodded. You'll want to see this. When Naomi stepped into the conference room, she was greeted by the unexpected sight of Jack Turner, clean-shaven, wearing a neat jacket over his sling, and sitting uncomfortably at the end of the long table. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Jack stood as Naomi approached, his face creased with something that looked like both humility and purpose. Mr. Turner, Naomi said evenly, her voice carrying a hint of surprise. What brings you back to Lakeshore? Jack shifted slightly, clearly unused to formal settings like this. Dr. Carter, he began gruffly, I wanted to come back, to see you, to say something in person. Naomi tilted her head, waiting for him to continue. Jack cleared his throat, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. After I left here, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened, about how I treated you when I first met you. I've spent my whole life not questioning things, not looking beyond what I already believed, and because of that, I almost missed seeing you for what you are. Naomi regarded him calmly, her expression unreadable, though her heart listened carefully. Jack hesitated, then pushed on. I was wrong about you, and about a lot of people, probably. I realized I can't fix who I used to be overnight, but I can start doing better. So I'm here. Naomi folded her hands in front of her. Here for what, Mr. Turner? To help, Jack said simply. I don't know much about hospitals or doctors, but I've spent 40 years in construction. I heard you talking about improving this place, getting funding for better equipment, better programs. Maybe I can connect you to people I know, contractors, donors, companies that owe me a favor or two. Let me help you build something better. Naomi's surprise flickered across her face before she quickly composed herself. Jack Turner, a man who had once dismissed her without a second thought, was now offering his help. It wasn't just an apology, it was action. You don't have to do that, Naomi said, her tone careful. I know I don't, Jack replied firmly, holding her gaze. But I want to. You gave me grace when I didn't deserve it. You made me see something I hadn't seen before. The least I can do is pay that forward, start making up for all the years I didn't. The conference room fell quiet for a moment, filled only by the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of voices beyond the door. Naomi studied Jack carefully. There was no arrogance in his words, no desire to erase his past with grand gestures. There was only sincerity and the quiet beginnings of change. Naomi nodded finally. If you're serious about helping, then let's talk. We have a lot of work to do here. Jack gave a small, almost shy smile. I'm serious, Dr. Carter. I'm not much for words, but I keep my promises. Naomi extended her hand, and Jack shook it firmly. Thank you, Mr. Turner. Change starts one step at a time. Later that day, Naomi sat at her desk, processing the surprising turn of events. Jack Turner's willingness to help wasn't just a victory for her. It was a reminder of the larger truth she'd always believed in. Change didn't always come in the ways you expected. It could begin in the quiet moments when someone chose to see the world differently. It could happen in the space between doubt and understanding, in the small ripples of kindness that spread outward, one person at a time. A soft knock at her office door interrupted her thoughts. Jasmine peeked in, looking brighter than she had the day before. Do you have a minute, Dr. Carter? Always, Naomi said, gesturing for her to come in. Jasmine entered, her expression open and earnest. I just wanted to thank you for yesterday. What you said to me, it made a difference. I realized I can't control how people see me, but I can control how I see myself. Naomi smiled warmly. That's exactly right, Jasmine. Jasmine hesitated for a moment, then added, I've decided to apply for the Leadership Mentorship Program. I know it's competitive, but I think I'm ready. Naomi's smile grew, pride filling her chest. You are ready, and I'll be here to help you every step of the way. Jasmine grinned, the confidence in her expression a far cry from the uncertainty she'd carried the day before. Thank you, Dr. Carter. I'll make you proud. You already have, Naomi replied softly. As the sun dipped lower in the sky that evening, Naomi found herself walking through the quiet hospital courtyard. The drizzle had stopped, leaving the air fresh and cool. Small puddles dotted the concrete, reflecting the faint glow of the streetlights. Naomi paused at a bench and sat down, letting herself breathe in the stillness. The day had been full of unexpected turns, quiet victories, and reminders of why she kept showing up. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced down to see a message from Rachel. I got asked to help lead a study group today. I think I'm starting to believe in myself. You were right. I just needed to keep showing up. Love you, Aunt Naomi. Naomi smiled softly, the weight in her chest replaced by something lighter, something hopeful. She tilted her head back and looked at the darkening sky, where faint stars began to emerge. The path she walked wasn't always easy, but she knew it mattered. Every time she showed up, every time she chose grace over anger, she cleared the way for others to follow. And slowly, steadily, the world began to change. Naomi rose from the bench, her footsteps deliberate, as she made her way back toward the hospital. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as it always did, but she would be ready. Because she wasn't just leading a hospital, she was holding the line. She was clearing the path. And in doing so, she was building something that would last. The hospital lights glimmered softly against the evening sky as Naomi stood at the edge of the courtyard, looking back at the building she had come to love so deeply. Lakeshore General was more than a hospital. It reflected the work she believed in, small steps toward change, moments of quiet strength, and a place where people's lives intersected in ways that mattered. Naomi thought about Jack Turner, about Jasmine, about young Rachel finding her own voice, and about every person who had come to understand that dignity was not something to be earned, it was something owed to all. Her journey wasn't over. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more doubts to confront, and more battles to fight. But Naomi knew she would continue to show up, to hold the line, and to inspire others to do the same. Because change wasn't about one grand moment. It was about the steady persistence of showing up day after day and refusing to give up. Naomi smiled faintly as she turned toward the hospital entrance, the quiet click of her heels echoing against the concrete. The work continued, and she was ready. Thank you for joining Dr. Naomi Carter on her journey, one of strength, grace, and quiet perseverance. Stories like Naomi's remind us that change begins with simple actions, standing up for ourselves, showing compassion to others, and believing in the ripples we create. If this story moved you or inspired you, please don't forget to like the video, share it with others who need to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful, thought-provoking stories. Let's keep building a world where dignity and respect belong to everyone. Together, one story at a time, we can make a difference. Hit that subscribe button and join us on the journey. Thank you for watching.